OSB is a nice material. It can be sturdy and even some kind of pretty, and in my opinion it's the best choice for covering your shop walls for looks and versatility. But you wouldn't consider it a candidate for fine furniture, right? I'm Dominic, this is Dominic's Woodworks, and I did not either. Good thing I did not aim for fine furniture with this project. In order to reclaim some shop space, I needed to make a storage solution for our garden tools, and, if possible, a couple of boxes and bags too. I picked a corner for where it would go and thought about coming up with design ideas. But instead, I measured the dimension I wanted to fill up, both to leave enough room as well as to accommodate the 2 sheets of OSB I had left over from another project. Since this is a custom project, and since you will not only have to copy the house, but also my odd preferences to make use of the exact same piece, I will go more into my thoughts than into the measurements used. For one, the former is usually more precise than the latter, despite the former being all over the place. To build the basic structure I use butt joints, glue and brad nails. Probably as quick and dirty as it gets. What kind of glue? Glad you asked, because glue turned out to be a major issue here. Let me start at the beginning, because where else would I? I knew I wanted to use OSB for the structural part, and it would see elements stop by every now and then. It would be slightly protected, but the designated spot is prone to get wet when the wind is right. The general purpose wood glue I use in my shop is waterproof, and frankly, that should have been the end of it. But I also had construction adhesive lying around, and we will get back to that, its expiration date had already passed. Add to that the vague recollection that John Hayes has used construction adhesive in the past, and you might see why I wanted to give it a spin. Thus, I use it to glue the pieces together, using brad nails as clamps. In 2 spots, I used biscuits for head-on connections because I did not have pieces long enough to use and wanted the added stability. Look at it. This thing is made from OSB using butt joints, 2 wood cookies and some construction adhesive. Frankly, I hated it. I had ideas to make it look better, but at that point I strongly disliked it. My wife made it even worse, because when I asked her to come down to the shop and look at it, approve it, she just said she knew I'd do a good job. Well, easy for her to say. To you, it probably looks like my biggest problem was getting a straight cut on the bandsaw now. In truth, it took me more than a week to actually pick it up again and get back at it, but video editing makes it look easy. Getting a straight cut on the bandsaw did prove too cumbersome, so I switched to the table saw. Can you tell that my lifting mechanism is busted again? It is hard to spot. The table saw allowed for straight cuts, and while it chews up more material than the bandsaw, it more than makes up for it through speed. You can probably guess what I'm planning. I want to cover the OSB using strips of wood like a crude veneer. And I started using construction adhesive again, and lots of clamps. Until I found that the adhesive was failing, and I have no clue why. See what I did there? I mean, on the first phase I covered it worked fine, but since it did not on the second, I chose to abandon it. Instead, I went all out crazy and used plain old wood glue, which worked just fine. I did not record much of this due to frustration with the glue, but I think this is kind of straightforward. But since I was glue switching anyway, I decided to try contact cement on one face. Of course, I almost messed that up, spreading the glue only on one side but omitting the other side, thus the strips. I managed to fix it in time, but I stuck to wood glue from there. Now comes the cleanup. First, I trim the edges with a flush trim bit in the router. Then I sand the strips, first with a more abrasive belt sander and then up through a few crits with a random orbital. There are some gaps which I try to fill with sawdust and glue. Now comes the most important step in prettying up OSB, the edge banding. You can get away with using it from the surface side, like I will on the inside of this piece, but the cut edges look, well, you can tell that it's OSB. So I cut strips as edge banding, and I make them thicker than the ones I used before to make sure that I can round them over without sanding through them. Again, I trim them flush with a flush trim bit wherever possible, and with a random orbital sander where not. And for the most part, that concludes this build. I also cut 2 shelves for the right side part of the cupboard and attached slats to the walls for them to rest on. I did that with neither accuracy nor decency in mind, but with the knowledge that neither fertilizer nor grass seeds have any expectation about their accommodation. I used spacers slightly larger than the largest box to go in there, and when I found that most of the boxes were that size, I opted for 2 shelves of that height, even though that left the third one rather small, but I'm sure it'll get filled up. I also added hinges for the door to open. It's actually more than a door, but the second half of a tool wall for all the gardening tools. I used plain screws to hang them whenever possible, and custom hangers where not. And here we are in its natural habitat. As you can see, I stained it to match other garden furniture that we have, but quite frankly, I did like the look without stain. Of course, I would have had to protect it either way, but I might also have used some acrylic lacquer to get this thing done. One thing that's due to impeccable planning and just precision is the fact that the door stays open and it stays closed. So much planning, in fact, that I was relying on sheer dumb luck for that to happen. As you can see, there are a couple more tools, and I think I'll be finding room for just a few more as they come up. This can, of course, be adapted for virtually any situation or place and allow you to put OSB virtually anywhere. Even the living room, but no guarantees. Please subscribe to my channel, and if you like this video, please share it with your friends. Thanks for watching, and as always, remember to be inspired.